Hey folks, in this episode I'm going to show you how to make this panel detail generator. It's easy to make, it's a really handy node setup to have. It's great for adding an extra level of detail to your scene really quickly without effort. When you've created this node structure and marked it as an asset, you can literally just drag and drop it onto any of your assets in your scene. So without further ado, let's get to it. So I'm going to select the default cube, I'm going to click delete, Shift A, and I'm going to go mesh, and I'm going to choose monkey, good old Suzanne. I'm going to hit numpad 1 just to go into front view. I'm going to hit numpad period to zoom into the selected object. I'll navigate to the shader tab over here. I'll then click this button and select the default material. If you haven't got the default material, just click new. I'll rename the material to level up. I'll then take my cursor to the bottom left of the 3D viewport until I see the crosshair. I'm going to left click and drag and open up a new window. I'll then change this window from the 3D viewport to geometry node editor. I'm going to click new, and I'll rename this node tree to panel detail generator. I'll just hit N to hide the N panel, and I'm going to zoom into these nodes. Maybe I'll increase this window just to give us a bit more room. I'm going to go into wireframe view just so you can see what's happening. I'm going to hit Shift A, and I'm going to search for dual, and we'll choose dual mesh, and I'll pop that in between there. I'll then hit Shift A, and I'm going to search for separate, and we're going to choose separate geometry, and I'll pop that after the dual mesh. I'm going to change it from point to faces. Shift A, I'm going to search for join, and we'll choose join geometry, and I'll pop that there. I'll then hit Shift A, I'm going to search for subdivide mesh, and I'll pop that down here. I'll then plug the inverted into the mesh socket of the subdivide mesh, and the mesh socket from the subdivide mesh into the bottom socket of the join geometry. I'll then hit Shift A, and I'm going to search for random, and we'll choose random value, and I'll pop that there. I'm going to change it from float to boolean. I'll plug the value socket into the selection socket of the separate geometry, and the way this works is we're going to use the probability slider on this random value to increase or decrease the chances of each face being subdivided. We need to add some of these nodes into a group, so I'm going to box select the dual mesh and the group input. I'll hit G, just drag these across over to here. I'll then box select these 4 nodes here. I'll then hit Ctrl G, and that will add them to a group. I'll then drag this probability value into the bottom socket of the group input node, and I'll also drag this seed value into the bottom socket of the group input node. I'll then hit tab to exit out of the node group. I'll now rename the node group to boolean subdiv for boolean subdivide. And now that we've got this node group, we can simply hit Shift D and chain these together, and that will give us more and more detail. And again, we can change the seed for each one, and we can change the probability for each one. Excellent. I'll just hit Ctrl Z a couple of times just to go backwards. You can see what that's doing in wireframe view. So let's go to solid view. Let's get on with the next step. I'll hit Shift A, and I'm going to search for split, and we'll choose split edges, and I'll pop that there. Shift A, and I'm going to search for extrude, and we'll choose extrude mesh, and I'll pop that at the end there. Now this offset value here controls the amount of extrusion, and I don't want the extrusion to happen evenly, so I'm going to hit Shift A, and I'm going to search for random, and we'll choose random value, and I'll pop that there. I'm going to keep it as a float, and I'll plug the value from the random value into the offset socket on the extrude mesh. The maximum distance I want to extrude will be 0.2, and I think the minimum will be 0.1. I think that's a bit strong, so I'm going to reduce the maximum to 0.05 and the minimum to 0.01. Okay, I'm kind of happy with that. I'll then hit Shift A, and I'm going to search for scale, and we'll choose scale elements, and I'll pop that after the extrude mesh. And now, if I adjust the scale on the scale elements, you can see that all the faces from each of the split edges is scaling, but we don't want that. We only want the top of the extrusions to be scaled, and with this extrude mesh, it's got a top value here, so we're going to take this top value and plug it into the selection of the scale elements. And now, when I adjust the scale, you can see only the top faces are scaled. Excellent. Again, I don't want all these to be the same, so we're going to drive this with another random value node. So I'm going to select this random value, I'm going to hit Shift D to duplicate, and I'll pop that there. I'll then plug the value from this random value into the scale socket of the scale elements node. Now we need to adjust the minimum and maximum. So I'm going to set the maximum to 0.85, and I'm going to set the minimum to, let's say, 0.75. Okay, that's looking quite good. You'll have to tailor these values to your scene. Obviously, if this is a bigger object, a minimum of 0.01 and 0.05 is going to be minuscule, so you'll probably have to increase these values for bigger objects and decrease them for smaller objects. I'll also change the seed values to something random. I'll also change the seed value on the boolean subdiv node group, maybe something around there. Excellent. Now, for example, say we didn't want the panels on all of the faces and we only wanted them on selected faces. That's easy enough. So I'm going to take this group input over here. I'm going to hit Shift D to duplicate. I'll just drag this random value down and I'll pop this group input in between here. I'll then plug the selection socket from the extrude mesh into the bottom socket of the group input. I'll select for group input. I'll then hit N to open up the N panel and make sure that you're on the group tab up here. I'll just drag this down and where it says selection, which matches here, I'm going to rename this to vertex group. I'll just hit N to hide the N panel. And now if I navigate to my modifier tab over here, you can see that we've got this vertex group option here. So if I click this button, I'll then navigate to my vertex data tab over here. I'm going to tab into edit mode. I'm going to select this face, this face, this face, and this face. And maybe I'm going to hover my cursor over the eye. I'm going to hit L and that will select all linked faces. And I'll do the same for this one. I'll hit L and then I'll navigate to my vertex tab over here. I'm going to click new and I'll rename this to like and subscribe, and then I'll click assign. I'll then navigate to my modifier tab over here and under the vertex group on our panel detail generator, I'm going to select that like and subscribe vertex group. I'll then tab out of edit mode and now you can see that the paneling is only appearing on the vertex groups. Excellent. Maybe I want to add a bit more detail, so I'm going to select this boolean subdivision node group. I'm going to hit Shift D and I'm going to pop that at the end of the node tree there. Maybe I'll just drag these across. Okay, looking good. Just going to box select all of these over here. I'm going to hit G, bring them across. For this example, I'm actually going to remove the vertex group. So I'm going to click this button here and that will remove the vertex group. Excellent. Maybe I'll add one more level of subdivision. So I'm going to select this boolean subdiv node group. I'll hit Shift D and I'll pop it at the end there. I'll also change the seed value. We can use this without the dual mesh. So we can plug the geometry directly into the boolean subdivision and that will give a different result. Personally, I like the dual mesh. I think it gives quite a nice flow. So we've got one last feature to add to this, and that's the material. But before we do that, I'm going to click File, and I'll choose Save As, and I'm going to save my project as like and subscribe. Thanks folks, you absolute legends. And then click Save As. So for the material, I'm going to add two elements here. I'm going to hit Shift A, and I'm going to search for Store. And we'll choose store named attribute and I'll pop that after the scale elements node. I'm going to change it from float to color. I'll also change it from point to face. And the attribute I want to capture will be the side socket from this extrude mesh. So I'm going to take this side socket and plug it into the value socket of the store named attribute. So essentially what this has done is added a mask between the top faces and the side extruded faces. Now we need to give that attribute a name. So I'm going to call mine Matt for material. When you name your attribute, just ensure that you remember exactly how you spelt it, because we're going to have to call it up in the shader editor. I'll then hit Shift A and I'm going to search for set and we'll choose set material and I'll pop that after the store named attribute and that material would be level up. Excellent. I'm just going to take my cursor to the top left of the geometry node window until I see a crosshair. I'm going to left click and drag across and that will open up a new window. I'll then change this from geometry node to shader editor. I'll just zoom out a bit. Okay, I'm just going to go into viewport shading so we can see what we're doing. Maybe I'll increase my shader editor. I'll just bring this up so I've got my store named attribute here. I'll then hit Shift A and I'm going to search for mix and we'll choose mix color and I'll pop that in between there. For this top value I'm going to change to like a grey color and maybe this bottom value I'm going to change to a blue color, something around there. I'll then plug the result from this mix color into the base color of the principal BSDF and now we're going to use this attribute to mix between the two. So I'll hit Shift A and I'm going to search for attribute and I'll add an attribute node there. We can either type in the name exactly how it's spelt here, or you can take your cursor over to your store named attribute, hit Ctrl C to copy, and then take your cursor to your attribute node and hit Ctrl V and paste it in there. And now if I drag the factor into the factor of the mix color, you can see that we've got these two materials. Excellent. You can also use this factor to drive the metallic, roughness, index of refraction, alpha, emission, or anything else that you like. I'm just going to keep it basic for now. So just as another example, I'm just going to mute Suzanne and I've got a corridor made in my scene. I'll just select that corridor. You can look at the topology if you like. So I'll just tab into edit mode and yeah, basically that's it there. I'm going to select all the faces that I want to have the detail added to. So I'm going to hit number 3 to go into face select and I'm just going to hold down Shift Alt and left click in between some faces to select face loops. Okay, that will do. I'll then go to my vertex data tab down here. I'm going to click add vertex group, and I'll rename this group to You Are Awesome. I'll then click assign. I'll then tab out of edit mode. I'll then go to my modifier tab over here. I'm going to click add modifier. We go to geometry nodes, and I'll click this button here, and we'll select the panel detail generator. I only want it to affect the vertex group, so I'll navigate to my modifier over here. I'll click this button here, and I'll choose that vertex group, which is You Are Awesome. If you come across this problem where your mesh shrinks like it's got a subdivision surface modifier on, that's no problem. You just zoom in over to here on your geometry nodes, select your dual mesh, and then hit M, and that will mute that node. Now we have run into another problem with this mesh because all the normals are pointing outwards. So if I zoom in and increase the extrusions, you can see that they're all going out, and I want them to point inwards. So I'm going to tab into edit mode, I'm going to hit Alt N, and I'll select flip, and that will flip the normals. And now if I tab out of edit mode and if I increase the extrusions on this random value node, you can see that they're all extruding inwards. I'll just quickly close this shader editor. And another problem that we're going to have, let me just re-enable Suzanne. I'll just bring her up to GZ. I'm just going to bring her up to there. So if I select my corridor, and then I'll increase the extrusion on the corridor, you can see it's also increasing on Suzanne, and we don't want that. I only want the extrusions to be local to this particular object. And a way around that is to take this group input node. I'm going to hit Shift D and duplicate. So I'll take this minimum value and plug it into the bottom socket. I'll take this maximum value and plug it into the bottom socket here. I'll then hit N to open up the N panel. Make sure that you're on group, and for minimum I'm going to rename this to extrude min, and for max I'm going to type in extrude max. I'll just drag this down here. I'll then take this group input, I'm going to hit Shift D to duplicate, and I'll pop it down here, and I'll do the same for this random value here, which controls the scale. So I'll drag this minimum value, plug it into the bottom socket of the group input, and I'll take this maximum value and I'll drag it into the bottom socket of this group input. I'll then select that group input, I'll navigate to my end panel over here, and for minimum I'm going to type in scale min, and for max I'm going to type in scale max. With this group input selected, I'm going to hit Control H, and that will hide all the unused sockets. With this group input, I'm going to hit Control H, hide all the unused sockets. I'll do the same for this one, Control H, and I'll do the same for this one here, Control H, just to keep things a bit more tidier. Excellent. Let's just drag these up. So now, essentially, what I can do is I can change the extrusions locally to this object without affecting Suzanne. So for the extrude minimum, I'm going to type in 0.1. For the extrude maximum, I'm going to type in 0.2. We have got another problem here. For some reason, the extrusions are happening on the floor, and the floor wasn't part of the vertex group. And that probably happened because I flipped the normals after I added the vertex group. So go to your vertex tab over here. Tab into edit mode. I'm going to hit Control I to invert the selection. So I've only got the 4 selected. And then on your vertex group over here, I'm going to click remove. Excellent. And that's fixed the problem. You can mark this panel detail generator as an asset. That's easy enough. So navigate to your outliner up here. Click this button and change it from view layer to blender file, and then scroll down until you see node groups. Expand the node groups options here, and you've got the panel detail generator. Right click on it and then select mark as asset. Now for this asset to appear in your asset browser, you have to go to edit, preferences, file paths, and then add the file path where you save this blender project, and then click this button here and click save preferences. I'll just close this window. I'm going to change this back from blender file to view layer. Join me on Patreon as a free member to get access to this file alongside other blender files from previous tutorials. That's this tutorial in a nutshell. I hope you found this useful. If you did, please click like and subscribe. It really helps my channel. Have a great day, level up, and thanks for watching.